Good morning, everybody. I am going to read a story called The Rough-Faced Girl. And I know this looks backwards to you, but that's okay. The Rough-Faced Girl is by Rafe Martin and illustrated by David Shannon. Once, long ago, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. Off from the other wigwams of this village stood one great, huge wigwam. Painted on its sides were pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. And inside this wigwam there was said to live a very great, rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome invisible being. However, no one could see him except his sister, who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry this invisible being, but his sister said, only the one who can see him can marry him. And here is a picture of the wigwams, decorated with all those beautiful pictures. Now, in this village, there lived a poor man who had 3 daughters. The 2 older daughters were cruel and hard-hearted, and they made their younger sister sit by the fire and feed the flames. When the burning branches popped, the sparks fell on her. In time, her hands became burnt and scarred. Her arms, too, became rough and scarred. Even her face was marked by the fire, and her beautiful long black hair hung ragged and charred. And those 2 older sisters laughed at her, saying, "Ha! You're ugly, you rough-faced girl." And they made her life very lonely and miserable indeed. Poor girl. One day, these 2 older sisters went to their father and said, "Father, give us some necklaces. Give us some new buckskin dresses. Give us some pretty beaded moccasins. We're going to marry the invisible being." So their father gave them these things. Dressed in their finest, the 2 girls marched through the village. All the people pointed and stared. "Look at those beautiful girls," they said. "Surely they shall marry the invisible being." And if those 2 girls were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now. They walked haughtily through the village. At last they came to the wigwam of the invisible being, and there was his sister waiting. Here's the girls walking through the village, looking very arrogant. "Why have you come?" said the sister. "We want to marry the invisible being," they answered. "That's why we're here." "If you want to marry my brother," she replied, "you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen the invisible being?" "Of course we've seen him," they insisted. "Can't you see how pretty we are? Can't you see the beautiful clothes we wear?" "Oh yes, anyone can tell that we've truly seen the invisible being." "All right," she said quietly. "If you think you've seen him, then tell me, what's his bow made of?" And suddenly her voice was swift as lightning and strong as thunder. There's the sister. His bow?" they stammered in surprise. "His bow? We know. But turning desperately to one another, they whispered, "What shall we say? What shall we say? Let's say it's the oak tree." So they said, "It's made from the oak tree." "No," said the sister of the invisible being. "No." Oh, she saw at once how they were lying. "Tell me," she continued, "if you think you've seen my brother, the invisible being, then what's the runner of his sled made of?" We know, cried those 2 sisters. But they whispered feverishly again to each other and wondered, what shall we say? What shall we say? "Oh, let's say it's the green willow branch." "No," said the sister when she heard that answer. "No, you have not seen my brother. Now go home." "Just test us fairly," they exclaimed. "We've seen him. Just don't ask us all these silly questions." All right, said the sister of the invisible being. Come with me. And she took them back to the great wigwam and sat them in the seats furthest from the entrance, the guest seats. Soon they heard footsteps coming along the path. Then something stepped inside. Ooh. And they could hear breathing, but they couldn't see a thing. Suddenly, a great bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air and were set down. But though those two girls sat there, their eyes wide, all through that night, they never saw one thing more. And in the morning, they had to go home ashamed. The next day, the rough-faced girl went to her father and said, Father, may I please have some beads? May I please have a new buckskin dress and some pretty moccasins? I am going to marry the invisible being, for wherever I look, I see his face. But her father sighed. Daughter, he said, I'm sorry I have no beads left for you, only some little broken shells. I have no buckskin dress. And as for moccasins, all I have left are my old, worn, cracked, and stretched out pair from last year. And they're much too big. But she said, whatever you can spare, I can use. So he gave her these things. She found dried reeds, and taking the little broken shells, she strung a necklace. She stripped birch bark from the dead trees and made a cap, a dress, and leggings. Then, with a sharp piece of bone, she carved in the bark pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. She went down to the lakeshore and soaked the moccasins in the water until they grew soft. Then she molded them to her feet. But they were still too big and they flapped like duck's feet as she walked. Then all of the people came out of their wigwams. They pointed and stared. Look at that ugly girl, they laughed. Look at her strange clothes. Hey, go home, you ugly girl. You'll never marry the invisible being. But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage. She did not turn back. She just kept walking right through the village. As she walked on, the great beauty of the earth and skies spreading, she saw the great beauty of the earth and skies spreading before her. And truly, she alone of all in that village saw in these things the sweet yet awesome face of the invisible being. Let's see if you can see the face. At last she came to the lake shore just as the sun was sinking behind the hills, and the many stars came glittering out like a fiery veil in the darkening sky overhead. And there, standing by the water's edge, was the sister of the invisible being. She was waiting. Now, the sister of the invisible being was a wise woman. When she looked at you, she did not see your face or your hair or your clothes. No. When she looked at you, she would look you right in the eye, and she could see all the way down to your heart. And she could tell if you had a good, kind heart or a cold, mean heart. When she looked at the rough-faced girl, she saw at once that though her skin was scarred and her hair was burnt and her clothes looked strange, she had a beautiful, kind heart. And so she welcomed her dearly, saying, "Ah, my sister, why have you come?" And the rough-faced girl replied, "I have come to marry the invisible being." "Ah," said the sister very gently now. "If you want to marry him, you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen my brother, the invisible being?" And the rough-faced girl said, "Yes." "All right then," said the sister. "If you have seen him, tell me what is his bow made of." And the rough-faced girl said, His bow? Why, it is the great curve of the rainbow. See the rainbow? That's his bow. Ah, exclaimed the sister in excitement. Tell me, she asked, if you have seen my brother, the invisible being, what's the runner of his sled made from? And the rough-faced girl, looking up into the night sky, said, the runner of his sled? Why, it is the spirit road, the Milky Way of stars that spreads across the sky. Do you see it? There it is, the Milky Way. Ah, said the sister in wonder and delight. You have seen him. Come with me. And taking the rough-faced girl by the hand, she led her back to the great wigwam and sat her in the seat next to the entrance, the wife's seat. Then they heard footsteps coming along the path, closer and closer. The entrance flap of the wigwam lifted up, and in stepped the invisible being. And when he saw her sitting there, he said, at last we have been found out. Then smiling kindly, he added, and oh, my sister, she's so beautiful. And his sister said, yes. Do you think he's talking about how beautiful her heart is? That's the important part, right? The sister of the invisible being then gave the rough-faced girl the finest of buckskin robes and a necklace of perfect shells. Now, bathe in the lake, she said, and dress in these. So the rough-faced girl bathed in the waters of the lake. Suddenly, all the scars vanished from her body. Her skin grew smooth again, and her beautiful black hair grew in long and glossy as a raven's wing. Now anyone could see that she was indeed beautiful, but the invisible being and the sister had seen that right from the beginning. They knew she was beautiful. Then at last the rough-faced girl and the invisible being were married. They lived together in great gladness and never parted. And that's the end of the rough-faced girl. That story reminds me of something, another story, a very old, popular story. I wonder if you can think of what it is. It reminds me of a very, very well-known story about a girl who was not treated very kindly by her two sisters, but ended up being the one who got to marry the person that the other people wanted to marry too. I won't say anything more. I just think you can think about it and see if you can come up with your own answer. All right. See you later. Bye.